Today we're going to take a look at how to produce a song like Don Broco. I started listening to Don Broco around the release of their album Automatic and have been a big fan ever since. They're one of my favorite bands, so I wanted to dive in and see what some of the common production techniques and songwriting things that they did on their songs are. So I gave myself a couple of days to write something in the vein of Don Broco, and this is what I came up with. So before we dive into the song, I'm Alex. I'm a music producer that works primarily on rock and pop and heavier genres. Bands like this are kind of right up my alley. I love a lot of British bands that have really cool production techniques and vary from album to album. So if you've got something like this, please reach out. I'd love to work with you. So if you ask me to name 3 characteristics that make up a Don Broco song, I would say they would be the riff, the groove, and the dynamic. So what I mean by that is most of their songs will start out with a really strong guitar riff that could also be played on bass. So that evolves throughout the song, and when the bass and drums come in, it kind of gives more of a sense of movement and groove depending on how those two instruments lock in with the main riff. And then built around the core of that riff, going from section to section, you have a lot of different dynamics. So you come in from maybe a main riff or a chorus, kind of duck down to a verse where it's lower energy, come up to a pre-chorus, which Don Broco are a big fan of, and then it explodes into that main chorus where they've either got the big chord progression or a rehash of the riff. With their last 3 albums, I think that they each had their own kind of unique characteristic. If you look at Automatic, you've got kind of more of a funky guitar, clean, delay-ridden tone. The album Technology was a little more gritty and had heavy use of a cowbell. And their most recent album, Amazing Things, is very big riff-wise and kind of distorted on a lot of the sounds, which gives it a really unique characteristic. So diving into the song, first we have this intro and the hook. Now, one of the cool things about Don Broco is that their hook and a chorus isn't always the same thing. This isn't something you see super often in popular music. Typically, your hook, or the main part of the song that kind of repeats, is the same thing as the chorus. When they're synonymous like that, you either have it or you don't. So it's cool with a lot of their songs because having the hook separate from the chorus means you really have 2 main focal points for each of the song, which makes it a lot more catchy. And you can also really vary that and have one be more of a riff-driven thing that's maybe kind of heavy, and then you can counteract that with a maybe more melodic chorus. So as you can hear in a moment, when you first introduce the hook, what you can do, and what I've done in this song, is kind of have it just a single guitar track right down the middle, kind of a clean guitar amp, just real plunky sounding, actually pretty boring. And then once that kicks in with the rest of the band, that's when you have more of that wide, double-tracked, panned-out guitar sound, and the rest of the band kicks in. So you kind of introduce that hook little by little, and it sounds, kind of all right, kind of catchy, and then when it kicks in, it really just kind of punches you in the face. So with that being said, this first lead is just coming in on a guitar amp. I just used a clean style amp with the Archetype Nolly plugin. And then I have it playing with some electronic percussion, just an 808 kit. After 4 measures of this, it breaks into the full band coming in, and that's when you really introduce the full severity of the hook. So really with that, it's the same guitar lead that's played in the beginning of the song. So again, starting out with just a real dry, plunky sounding lead, once you throw that through some better sounding amps, aside from Don Broco uses the Marshall amps, I believe at JCM 800, so that's kind of what I've got going on here. I just have this as the main guitar tone being panned out left and right, double tracked. And it's got an overdrive pedal on it here, just kind of boosting a little bit of the preamp gain going in. And then if you double that same riff with just the bass, it's playing the same thing, but it gives it a little more reinforcement in the low end. So again, that same riff that's going to repeat through the song. The drum beat just kind of mirrors the riff with a couple different snares there. And as you can hear, I've got the cowbell coming in as kind of a nod to some of the songs off of Technology. Now, going into the verse, you can still use the hook, and this creates some familiarity with the listener. So there's already a lot of songs that use this that Don Broco's written. So Pretty, for example, Super Love has the main hook on the bass that carries through the intro and the first verse. Gum Shield, off their newest release, has that main melody or the main hook on a synthesizer, I believe. So with the verse, it's really just the drum beat that's playing throughout the entirety of it. The bass comes in and kind of mirrors some of that initial hook, but it's just really playing when the kick drum is happening. So you really get that accented tone on those particular notes. So if we just listen to the stringed instruments playing in the verse, we can kind of hear that, again, this is built off of that main hook, but it's played in a different octave on the guitar, so it sounds lighter and not quite as full. So it gives it a little more of a different tonality. It doesn't have quite as much weight to it, so it sounds a little more plunky, kind of like that original hook that we had in the intro. So mirrored with the bass, it kind of gives it this familiarity, but it also sounds a little different and not quite full yet. I also added in this Moog bass here, which is just kind of a thing that they've been kind of doing with some synthesizers recently. Really all this is just a patch that kind of emulates a synth sound for what the bass is doing and gives it a little more of an electronic characteristic. So those three elements combined with the drums, you can then hear what that sounds like. So again, it's still the same hook, but it's presented in a different manner, so it sounds familiar, but it's still kind of different. It's doubled on the synth bass, in this case the Moog, and then the bass guitar is just playing it on the lower octave. So you've got a real big disparity between these octave ranges that make it sound kind of all over the place, and then when it comes back together later on in the song, it's going to sound like more of a cohesive unit. If you listen, you'll also hear I panned out the guitar lead all the way to the left, so it gives it a little bit more disjointedness to the listener. So kind of quirky sounding, but again, it's reinforcing that main hook. So going from the last couple measures of the verse into the pre-chorus, we have this. You can already hear it's building up to some very climactic thing in the chorus. But basically what I've done here is that in the pre-chorus, you want a different change in the drums to kind of suck everything out right before the chorus hits. So I've achieved this in kind of a dirty sounding way. So if we go up to the drum bus here, what I have is a few effects that kick in on just this pre-chorus part. And basically all I'm playing on the drums here is just a little bit of kick, snare, and then some tom accents. So it sounds very sparse on its own, which is good to create movement going up into the chorus, but it's also not super exciting to the listener. So what I did was basically just throw some reverb on it, some delay, and some distortion, and give it kind of this lo-fi crunchy sound, which they really explored a lot of in their most recent album. So if I solo the drums, this is what this sounds like, and you can see these effects down on the bottom will kick in and out. So really what I'm doing here is I'm putting in a good bit of reverb to make it sound a little more distant, but also thicker, adding in some slapback delay. And then the big thing with this is I have this distortion plugin Decapitator on it. And if I take this in and out, you can hear this really kind of dirties it up. So with it out, you can kind of hear it. Sounds a little more roomy just with the reverb and the delay. But this really kind of crunches it up, makes it sound like it was run through like a dirty tape machine or something. Rolled off a lot of the high end, so it sounds a little further pushed back. And then when the chorus comes in and that high end comes back, it's going to have a lot greater impact. Now, what I've also done in the entirety of the verse and the pre-chorus, and this is a really cool trick you can do for any kind of song where you want to really accentuate the chorus, is that you'll see I have this light EQ on the entirety of the drum bus, and basically what this is doing is it's cutting out everything below about 75 hertz, and it's also filtering out some of the frequencies above about 12.7 kilohertz. So it's not super noticeable, but that takes away just enough of the low end and just enough of the high end so that when that's reintroduced in the chorus, the drums sound a lot bigger than they did in the previous few measures. So if I play just going from the last measure of the verse and then going through the chorus, you can really hear what that sounds like and hear how dynamic that's going to sound and add more life into the chorus. So So if I play this going from the pre-chorus to the chorus now, you'll hear how much of a change this makes to the chorus, and it sounds a lot more big and full because of the changes that we've made in the pre-chorus. So that's a pretty cool trick for choruses. It's a neat way to make them sound a lot bigger. As you can see, I've also led into that with a couple of risers just leading into that chorus. So it creates a sense of kind of swelling movement going into something bigger. This is a technique you see a lot in electronic music. And then I also have that coming out of the chorus and going into the hook, which is playing right after that chorus. So taking a look at the chorus, you can see that I have a few different guitars panned out here. I have the main guitar that's just playing the main rhythm progression. Again, this is just through a Marshall style amp. And then I've double tracked this through a second guitar amp that's a little more high gain and sounds more saturated, so it blends in really nicely with kind of the mid focus of the Marshall. This is how it sounds on its own. This is the amp I'm using. So blend it in with the original amp. Now if we take that second amp out, you can hear it, they blend pretty nicely. You can also see on here, when I double track this, I panned it left and right on one of the takes, and it's playing the exact same thing. It's just the main progression and a major and minor chords. And then on this other one that are colored kind of this mustard yellow looking thing, I played a different voicing for those same notes. These are using kind of a power chord shape on the guitar and then adding in the second fifth. So you're really just stacking the main octaves and then the fifths on there. So on these ones, in addition to the second chord voicing that I'm playing through these, I'm also playing one of each voicing through one channel of each amp. Honestly, there wasn't a huge difference, but it added a little bit more width when you played voicing 1 and voicing 2 in one amp, and then voicing 1 and voicing 2 in another amp. Typically, I would just do the same voicing through one amp and then a completely different voicing through the other amp. Really, again, not a big deal, but it kind of added a little bit more width to it, so that's one of those really minute details you can play around with if you want to get a little more width to your sound. So if I take that additional voicing in and out, this is what it sounds like. Out. Back in. Back out. And those are really just double tracked in the choruses and then the final chorus, so that's not something that comes in on the hook, but it does give it a little bit of extra weight in the chorus. Additionally, in the chorus, I have some strings and a piano, so just playing underneath the guitars are this. This is something that you'll see in a lot of Don Broco songs. It could be strings, it could be horns, synth pads, synth leads. Like a lot of the other music I listen to, I feel they do a really good job of blending that synthetic and acoustic element. And the piano line's kind of reminiscent of what you hear in their song T-Shirt Song. It's just kind of a counter melody to the main melody that serves to add a little bit more purpose, I guess, to the chorus. So after the chorus, I have this coming back to the hook, and it just kind of reintroduces that really quick before going into the middle 8 or the bridge. You typically put a second verse after this, but because this is just a short kind of demo song, I've just had it leading in directly to the middle 8. So here's what it sounds like coming out of the chorus, reintroducing the hook, and then going to the middle 8. So again, we've used that trick where the beginning of the hook is really just the guitar. It's got some 808 bass drum hits there, but that's reintroducing the hook, so it's something that the listener is already familiar with. And then to start out the middle 8 or the bridge, it's again going back to this really plunky, clean sounding guitar riff that doesn't sound that great on its own, where it further breaks out back into this big split out wider guitar tone. And also for the hook here, it's a little different. It uses the same notes, but it's a little more simple, almost kind of like a breakdown. One of my old guitar instructors said for the bridge or the middle 8, you usually either want to tone it down or break it down. So I opted for the latter in this one, where you just have a heavier, thicker kind of sound with that main hook lead. And also, just like the pre-chorus, I've done a similar thing on the drums up here. If I play this, when the drums come back in, they don't come back in full, they kind of ramp up here. So in these few bars, when the drums are reintroduced, again, I've got this EQ going, but I have this auto filter here. So it's starting out with rolling off basically all of the high frequencies, and then that slowly comes back up. So when the full band kicks back in, you've got that full frequency coverage. So if you look at the filter down here, you can kind of see what this is doing as it's coming back in. So again, that's a really nice trick that you can use to go from section to section to create a really big dynamic. Lastly, we have the chorus again. This is just the same chorus, just played twice, and then I have some additional percussion again through there. The second half of the chorus has this Moog bass come in that you really don't hear throughout the song other than this middle 8 and in the verse here. And then you can see on the strings down here, I've actually added one more high note that kind of climbs up. And this isn't in the section right below it. It's just these basic triad chords for the most part. So this adds a little bit different voicing in just going out of that final chorus and then into the outro, which I'll play that here. And then this outro I'm pretty happy with. I thought this was cool. This is really just the same chord progression that I've been using through the choruses of the song. The Moog bass here is just playing alternated octaves on the main progression. So you'll see kind of a toned down outro like this on a few of their songs that creates a good difference between the heaviness of the rest of the song. A few of their songs use this, most notably this reminds me of their song Keep On Pushing. The end of that song has a synth section like this where it has this really cool just kind of electronic feel to it. So as far as the effects and some of the other production things I've used throughout this song, really with these are just some risers that I've kind of mangled a little bit in time stretch to get them to fit where I want them to. The strings and the piano give it a little bit more weight in kind of the low mid section just because it bulks up the guitars a little bit and provides more of a sort of classical sounding element to the song, which pairs nicely with the aggressiveness of the guitars and the drums. For the bass guitar, I really just opted to keep a pretty clean DI signal. I've got it going through this bass overdrive, a little bit of EQ, compression, multi-band compression, and then adding some extra low-end harmonics. But that blends in really nicely with the guitar, and they have typically a pretty clean bass sound in a lot of their songs, except maybe some of their more recent ones. For my master bus processing and the mastering elements, I've really just got it running through some EQ, compression. I've got this tape emulator here, doing some corrective EQ with the Universal Audio Chandler Curve Bender, adding a little bit more compression that's got a slower attack and faster release, adding in some saturation, and then just using the good old ozone limiter to get it to a competitive volume. Oh, I've also got some snare one-shot samples that I recorded when I was doing the drums that I didn't end up using, but they're there sometimes just as reinforcement. So I'll go ahead and play this from start to finish. Please drop a like and subscribe if you like this video. Let me know in the comments what you would have done differently or what you think on some of the parts here. I had a lot of fun making this. Like I said, Don Broco is one of my favorite bands. I've really gotten into him pretty heavy over the past few years and seen him live a bunch of times. So this was a cool exercise in just exploring what really makes the band kind of have their own unique sound and figure out how to go from kind of just a simple guitar hook to a fully produced song that keeps the listener interested in different parts while still remaining pretty dynamic throughout the entire song. So thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed the song, and I'll see you next time.